Have you ever had your storage facility taken from you and then been forced to pay rent to use your own property? That's exactly what happened to me. Ben Morrison, when my HOA president took control of my family business, she thought she could profit
from my hard work. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't going down without a fight. As she made her move, I had to find a way to turn the table. What happened next was something she never saw coming. Ever dealt with someone like this in your
life? Maybe you've had your own Victoria trying to take advantage of you. Let me know in the comments how you fought back. I'd love to hear your stories. Morrison Storage has been my whole life since 2009 when my grandfather left it to me for 15
years. I've run this place without a single complaint, regular customers, steady income of about $8,000 a month. Everything perfect. Morrison Storage had been part of my family since 1994, and for the past 15 years, I kept it running without a hitch. Each day, I felt I was not just maintaining a business, but preserving my grandfather's legacy, the trust and respect of our loyal customers. I took pride in having maintained this business through all these years without encountering any trouble. The customers aren't just clients, they're like family. Mrs. Patterson stores her late husband's antiques. Mr. Wilson keeps his classic car collection. Young families store outgrown furniture. It's been a peaceful, profitable little corner of the American dream. The facility itself holds so many memories beyond just business transactions. I remember helping elderly customers carry heavy boxes, listening to stories about the items they were storing, celebrating with young families when they needed more space because their lives were expanding. Each storage unit represented someone's trust in me to keep their treasures safe, walking through the facility every morning, checking the security systems, making sure everything was clean and organized. These weren't just business tasks, they were acts of stewardship that connected me to my grandfather's vision of serving the community with integrity and reliability. Then Victoria Kensington walked into my life at 7 in the morning on a Monday, and everything changed. Victoria stepped in with an overly confident smile that immediately set my nerves on edge. My eyes couldn't help but stay fixed on her as she moved through my facility. There was something predatory in the way she observed everything, evaluating every corner, every asset, and I felt like I was being controlled by that calculating gate. The way Victoria assessed everything around her wasn't like a customer, but like a predator searching for a target, making me feel like I was being watched. Victoria dressed like she had money, but everything screamed cheap imitation, like she was trying to create a fake impression of success. Her handbag looked designer from far away, but up close you could see the poor quality materials and craftsmanship that gave it away. "Good morning, Ben," she said, extending a manicured hand with chipped polish. "I'm Victoria Kensington, your HOA president. I've been meaning to stop by and chat about our wonderful growing community." The way she emphasized "our" made my skin crawl, but I couldn't quite figure out why yet. When she began asking about revenue, I realized these questions weren't innocent curiosity. These were the questions of a predator looking for ways to attack. She wasn't here to chat at all, but to hunt for something specific, and the intensity of her focus was making me increasingly uncomfortable. "Is there some kind of problem with the storage facility?" I asked, genuinely confused because I'd never received a single complaint in 15 years. The facility's been operating since before the HOA was even established, and we have all our permits up to date. Victoria's smile got wider, but somehow colder, more threatening. "Oh no problems at all. I'm just curious about the business side of things, you know. How many customers do you have? What kind of revenue does a place like this generate? What are your rental rates?" The questions came rapid fire, like she was conducting some kind of business audit rather than making a neighborly visit. I gave her some general answers, nothing too specific, but I could see her mentally calculating numbers the whole time, She walked around the perimeter of the building, taking what looked like measurements. With her eyes asking about square footage and capacity, every step she took felt like an invasion, like she was claiming territory that didn't belong to her. Victoria made me feel like I was being violated, like she had discovered something that I couldn't see myself. Something about her presence felt wrong, like she was evaluating my property, not as a neighbor, but as someone looking for weakness to exploit. Ben, she said as she prepared to leave. HOA regulations can be fluid, they
Evolve to meet the community's changing needs. I hope we can find solutions that benefit everyone involved. The way she said solutions made it sound more like a threat than an offer of cooperation, and I felt a knot forming in my stomach. There was
something ominous in her tone that suggested she already had plans for my facility that I wouldn't like after she left. I called my best friend Marcus Rodriguez, who happens to be a real estate lawyer and lives 3 houses down from me. Marcus has been my neighbor for 8 years, and he's the kind of guy who can smell legal trouble from a mile away, dude. I told him I just had the weirdest visit from our new HOA president. She was asking way too many questions about my business finances, and something about her energy felt completely wrong. Marcus laughed it off at first, probably just another neighborhood Karen trying to flex her new authority, but keep an eye on her. Ben, sometimes these HOA positions attract people with questionable motives. That night I couldn't shake the feeling that Victoria's visit wasn't random. Something about the way she looked at my facility, the specific questions she asked, the fake friendliness, masking something calculating underneath it all, felt like I was being sized up by someone with bad intentions. I'd been dealing with customers and neighbors for years, and I'd developed pretty good instincts about people's real motivations. Victoria Kensington wasn't concerned about community standards or noise complaints. She was conducting some kind of business evaluation, and that made absolutely no sense for a HOA president unless she had plans that had nothing to do with community welfare. The following Tuesday morning, I arrived at the facility to find Victoria's car parked across the street. She sat there for nearly an hour, just watching my facility, like she was conducting surveillance. When I walked over to ask if everything was okay, she quickly started her engine and drove away without saying a word. That evening, Marcus came by with a concerned expression. Ben, I've been doing some research on our new HOA president. Victoria Kensington moved here about 6 months ago after being evicted from her previous home for non-payment of HOA fees, apparently. She got into several disputes with neighbors over property boundaries and community rules. What does that mean for me? I asked, though I was already starting to suspect the answer. Marcus shook his head grimly. It means she's probably looking for ways to generate income through her HOA position, and your successful business makes you a perfect target. People like Victoria don't usually limit themselves to legitimate authority. They look for ways to expand their power and profit
from it.
The implications of what Marcus was saying hit me like a cold wave. Victoria wasn't just a difficult neighbor or overzealous HOA president. She was a predator who had identified my storage facility as her next victim. The next week, a certified letter arrived that would shatter my peaceful world completely. When I opened that letter, my eyes could only focus on the threatening words staring back at me. Each phrase felt like a punch to my stomach, the overly complex legal language designed to make me panic about things I didn't understand. The letter came from a lawyer, and it felt more like a threat than a notice full of complicated legal jargon. It did nothing but confuse me. It was 3 pages of intimidating bureaucracy demanding I shut down within 30 days or face a lawsuit. It was 3 pages of bureaucratic nonsense designed to intimidate rather than inform. demanding that I cease operations within 30 days and threatening lawsuit if I didn't cooperate. I felt like I was being pulled into a whirlpool that I couldn't control. Everything was slipping away from me, but I had no idea how to fight back against something I didn't understand. The legal terminology was deliberately confusing, filled with phrases like regulatory non-compliance and community safety violations that sounded serious but were completely meaningless in the context of my well-established, properly licensed business. I read the letter 3 times, each reading making me more anxious and confused about what Victoria was actually claiming I had done wrong. I immediately called Marcus, who agreed to meet me that evening, to review the documents. Marcus only needed a few minutes to realize that the lawyer was a nobody with no experience in this kind of case, Ben, he said. After reading through everything twice, this is mostly garbage, designed to scare you. This Bobby Kleinfeld guy is a bottom-tier divorce attorney who's never handled a HOA case in his life. Victoria basically hired the legal equivalent of a mall security guard to threaten you. Marcus's analysis should have made me feel better, but knowing that Victoria was willing to pay someone to create fake legal threats just made the situation feel more sinister and calculated. But here's where things got really ugly and where I started to feel completely helpless while I was dealing with the fake legal threats. Victoria launched a much more effective attack on my actual business. She started calling my customers directly, one by one, with carefully crafted warnings about serious legal issues surrounding the storage facility. After 2 weeks, I had lost nearly 40% of my customers each call from Victoria, making them afraid and gradually driving them away. Each customer call felt like a slap in the face, making me unable to believe what I was facing. I tried to stay calm, but my heart wouldn't stop boiling with anger at the lies Victoria was spreading. The feeling that I was losing control of everything intensified. With every phone call from confused, frightened customers, Mrs. Patterson called me in tears after Victoria's phone call. Ben, honey, this woman told me your facility might be shut down by the county, and if I don't move my husband's things immediately,
I could lose everything, she said. There might be criminal liability for customers who store items in an illegal facility. I can't afford to lose Harold's antiques. They are all I have left of him. Victoria's phone calls were surgical in their effectiveness.
designed to create maximum fear with just enough believable details to seem credible. She had clearly researched each customer's situation, knowing exactly which emotional buttons to push to create maximum panic for elderly customers like Mrs. Patterson. She emphasized potential legal liability and property loss for young families. She focused on safety concerns and insurance complications for business customers. She highlighted regulatory violations and potential fines. Each call was perfectly tailored to exploit the specific fears and vulnerabilities of individual customers. I wasn't just losing money, I was losing the relationships I had built over so many years. Every time I saw the suspicious looks from customers, I felt like a fraud. Some customers called me directly to ask about Victoria's claims, while others simply showed up to empty their units without explanation, looking at me with suspicion and fear that made me feel like I was some kind of criminal. The financial impact was devastating, but worse than the money was watching long-time customers who trusted me suddenly treat me like I was running some kind of scam operation. I confronted Victoria about the phone calls during a chance encounter at the grocery store, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and desperation. Victoria, why are you calling my customers with false information about legal problems? She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she smiled, that cold, calculating smile I was beginning to recognize. Ben, I'm simply informing community members about potential risks to their property. If you have a problem with people making informed decisions about their storage needs, Maybe you should examine your own business practices. You're deliberately spreading false information to destroy my business, I said, trying to keep my voice level while feeling like I was drowning in helplessness. Victoria's response was chilling in its casual cruelty. Prove it, Ben. And even if you could, do you really have the resources for a legal battle? I understand business can be challenging when the community loses confidence in your reliability. She pushed her card away, leaving me standing there, realizing that I was dealing with someone who had no intention of playing fair. That night, Marcus came over and found me sitting in my kitchen, staring at the latest batch of cancellation requests, feeling completely overwhelmed by forces I couldn't control. "This isn't random harassment," I told him, my voice shaking with exhaustion and stress. "Victoria has a plan, and destroying my customer base is just the beginning. She wants something specific from my business, and she's willing to lie, cheat, and manipulate to get it." Marcus nodded grimly. Seeing how this psychological warfare was affecting me, the attacks continued for another week. Victoria would drive past my facility multiple times per day, sometimes stopping to take pictures or make phone calls while staring directly at my building. She started spreading rumors at neighborhood gatherings about questionable business practices and potential safety violations at the storage facility. Several neighbors mentioned that Victoria had approached them with concerns about noise traffic and declining property values caused by my operation. Marcus advised me to start documenting every sighting of Victoria near my facility, every customer complaint that traced back to her interference, every rumor that could be connected to her campaign against my business. "We need to build a case showing a pattern of harassment and business interference," he told me. "Victoria is being systematic about this, which means she's probably done something like this before." The psychological pressure was enormous. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when Victoria would strike next. My sleep suffered, my appetite disappeared, and I started making mistakes in my daily business operations because I was so distracted by worry and stress. The facility that had been my sanctuary for 15 years was becoming a source of constant anxiety and dread. The answer to Victoria's ultimate plan came the following week when she made her move at the monthly
HOA meeting, and I realized that everything she'd done so far was just preparation for something much worse. The emergency HOA meeting was called for 7 p.m.
on a Tuesday, giving most working residents barely 24 hours notice. Victoria had clearly planned this timing to minimize attendance and maximize her chances of getting whatever she wanted. Approved. When I arrived at the community center, only 7 of our neighborhood's 12 HOA members were present. Victoria stood at the front of the room with official-looking documents and that same predatory smile I'd seen weeks earlier. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," Victoria began, her voice dripping with fake concern that made me want to interrupt immediately. "I've discovered some very serious legal issues regarding Ben Morrison's storage operation that require immediate community action to protect all of our interests." Victoria quickly took control of the meeting, making it impossible for me to speak up, even though I had every right to defend myself every time I tried to speak up. She would cut me off with some procedural excuse. I began to feel like an outsider in my own community, watching my neighbors be manipulated by someone who clearly had no genuine concern for their welfare. Helen Winters, a 67-year-old widow who'd lived in the neighborhood for 12 years, raised her hand tentatively. "Victoria, dear, I don't quite understand what kind of risks you're talking about. Ben's facility has been here longer than our HOA has existed, and I've never heard any complaints." Victoria's response was designed to make anyone who questioned her seem naive or irresponsible. "Helen, I appreciate your loyalty to Ben, but we can't let personal relationships cloud our judgment when it comes to legal compliance and community safety." Every time I opened my mouth to defend myself, Victoria would somehow manage to silence me or make me appear unreasonable, the feeling that I was watching my empire crumble before my eyes became overwhelming as I realized how effectively she was controlling the narrative each time I wanted to speak up. Victoria would somehow make me go quiet either through procedural manipulation or by redirecting the conversation in ways that made my objections seem selfish or inappropriate. Marcus tried to interject with actual facts about grandfathered commercial operations and existing permits, but Victoria steamrolled right over him with practiced ease. "Marcus, I understand you and Ben are close friends, but friendship can't override legal responsibility. We need to act in the best interests of the entire community, not just protect one person's business interests," the way she said close friends made it sound vaguely suspicious, like Marcus couldn't be trusted to provide objective legal analysis. Then Victoria dropped her bombshell proposal that would change my life forever. Victoria proposed seizing my property under the guise of protecting the community, but it was really just a scheme to steal my assets to protect our community while still supporting Ben's livelihood. I'm recommending that the HOA temporarily assume management of the storage facility pending full legal compliance review. Ben would rent back approximately 1/3 of the facility space for his personal business use at $800 per month, while the HOA manages the remaining space to ensure proper community standards. The room fell silent as people tried to process what Victoria was actually proposing, and I felt like I was having an out-of-body experience. It was theft, dressed up in bureaucratic language and presented as a public service. But here's the terrifying part. It was working. I could see several HOA members nodding along, convinced that Victoria was offering a reasonable compromise to a complex legal problem. Helen Winters looked confused and concerned, which gave me a brief moment of hope. "I'm not sure I understand how the HOA can take over Ben's private business. That doesn't sound legal to me." Victoria was ready for this objection, with an answer that sounded reasonable on the surface but was completely fraudulent underneath. "Helen, we're not taking over anything. We're providing temporary management services to ensure compliance with county regulations. Ben maintains ownership and continues operating just under proper oversight." The vote was called. Before I could properly explain why Victoria's proposal was completely illegal and utterly ridiculous, Marcus tried to provide some actual legal context, but Victoria controlled the meeting agenda and limited discussion time in ways that prevented any real examination of her claims when the ballots were counted. Victoria's proposal passed 4 votes to 3. Helen Winters, Mr. Martinez, they themselves, Thompson, and Mr. Davis voted in favor, swayed by Victoria's presentation about legal liability and community protection. I sat in my car afterwards staring at my storage facility and trying to process what had just happened to my life in the span of 2 hours. Victoria had convinced my own neighbors to hand over control of my family business to the HOA, with her as the sole decision-maker about how it would be managed. The worst part was that several people who voted for the proposal genuinely believed they were helping me navigate a complex legal situation. Victoria had manipulated their trust and concern into weapons against me, and I felt completely powerless to defend myself against such calculated deception. That night, I called my grandfather's
old business partner, now in his 80s, to ask if he'd ever seen anything like this before. Ben. He told me, his voice heavy with experience and sadness. "I've been in business for 60 years and I've seen every kind of scam and scheme you can imagine. What you're dealing with isn't incompetence or misunderstanding. It's deliberate, calculated
theft by someone who's probably done this before." The next morning, Victoria arrived at my facility at 8 a.m. sharp with a locksmith and 2 HOA board members. She had new locks installed on the main entrance and handed me a single key along with a rental agreement for the smaller section of my own building. Ben, I hope you understand this is all for the best, she said, with that fake, sympathetic tone that made my skin crawl. The community needs to feel confident that everything is being handled properly. Standing there with a rental agreement for my own family's property, I realized that Victoria hadn't just stolen my business, she'd turned my own neighbors into accomplices in the theft. Within 1 month of Victoria's takeover, Morrison Storage looked like a completely different place, and every morning when I arrived for work, I felt like
I was witnessing the destruction of my family's legacy. My facility was now full of worthless, junk broken items with no value, even things that had been damaged for years. It wasn't just a storage facility anymore. It was the place where my family's
heritage was being systematically destroyed. Victoria had convinced 8 families to use the community storage space for free, telling them it was one of the benefits of HOA membership. But what she didn't tell them was that she was charging each family $75 per month in management fees. The transformation was heartbreaking to witness every single day. The Thompson family moved in their old sectional sofa with massive rips and ancient stains. The Williams family brought broken bicycles and garbage bags full of musty clothes. The Martinez family contributed a washer and dryer that hadn't worked in years, along with boxes of random junk. The Johnson family's contribution was the most ridiculous, a jet ski that hadn't run in over a decade, taking up a quarter of the available space and leaking mysterious fluids. I had to work around piles of junk from the neighborhood, all while paying $800 a month to rent 1/3 of my own facility every day. More random items appeared overnight.
old decorations, broken equipment, forgotten boxes. It felt like watching my grandfather's legacy turn into a junkyard. Old decorations, broken exercise equipment, boxes of forgotten contents. It was like watching my grandfather's legacy being transformed
Into the world's most expensive garage sale waiting to happen. Those remaining loyal customers began to look at me like I was some kind of fraud, questioning whether I was still capable of providing professional service. Each suspicious glance felt like a personal failure, making me question whether I was truly as incompetent as Victoria was making me appear to be. Some asked pointed questions about the changes in management and whether their belongings were still secure. Others simply looked around at the chaos and mess, clearly wondering if they should find somewhere else to store their valuable possessions. But here's where Victoria's scheme became truly diabolical, and where I started to understand the full scope of her deception. While she was collecting $75 per month from 8 families, that's $600 in management fees, she was also pocketing the $800 I was paying in rent. Victoria was making $400 per month for my own storage facility, while doing absolutely zero work to earn it. Every HOA member believed they were getting free storage space as a community benefit. Ellen Winters was the first person to start asking uncomfortable questions that would eventually expose Victoria's entire operation as a retiree who spent a lot of time at home. She noticed Victoria's lifestyle changes quickly. The fake designer items were replaced with genuine articles. The home hair treatments became regular salon visits. Most telling, Victoria traded her aging Honda for a much newer model with premium features. When neighbors asked about these improvements, Victoria mentioned something vague about a small investment opportunity that's paying off nicely. Helen became suspicious enough to start paying closer attention to Victoria's behavior during HOA meetings and conversations. When Helen asked to review the association's financial records, Victoria deflected with vague explanations about protecting sensitive information and maintaining proper protocols. When Helen specifically asked about storage facility management fees, Victoria provided confusing answers about covering costs and ensuring maintenance, but Helen had been involved in community organizations for decades, and recognized bureaucratic double talk. When she heard it, the breakthrough came when Helen decided to do some detective work with help from her technology-savvy granddaughter. Her granddaughter taught her how to use the voice recording app on her smartphone, and Helen started documenting conversations with Victoria about HOA finances. What she discovered was much worse than anyone had imagined. Victoria wasn't just collecting money from both sides. She was actively bragging about how clever her scheme was to anyone who would listen. Helen recorded Victoria's phone conversation, where she explained her strategy in detail with cruel satisfaction. "This plan is absolutely perfect I'm making. 400 every month from that idiot Ben's storage facility. He's literally paying me rent to use his own property while I collect management fees from all the neighbors for letting them store their junk there. Ben is so naive. He has no idea how badly I'm screwing him over. I can keep this going for at least 2 years and make at least 30,000 in pure profit." That evening, Helen called me in tears, apologizing profusely for voting in favor of Victoria's proposal and begging for my forgiveness. "Ben, I had no idea what kind of person she really is. I thought she was trying to help the community navigate legal issues. I never imagined she was just stealing from you while lying to all of us." Helen played me the recording, and I felt something inside me snap. This wasn't just business fraud, it was personal betrayal by someone who had manipulated my neighbor's trust to destroy my livelihood while enriching herself and laughing about my suffering. The recording revealed that Victoria had been planning this from the moment she first visited my facility. She'd researched HOA regulations, specifically looking for ways to claim authority over private businesses. She'd deliberately chosen families with large amounts of unwanted items to store, knowing they'd pay management fees without questioning the arrangement. She'd even planned the timing of the emergency meeting to minimize opposition to her proposal. For the first time in this entire ordeal, wasn't just angry or frustrated or confused. I was determined to fight back with everything I had, and I finally understood exactly how to do it. The recording Helen gave me changed everything, but it also made me anxious, doubting if I had the strength to see this through. Every time Marcus presented a new plan, I questioned whether I could actually pull it off. Every time Marcus presented a new plan, I found myself questioning whether I had the strength to execute it. Everything was weighing down on me, and I couldn't stop wondering if I was walking on a tight rope that could snap at any moment. Listening to Victoria laugh about screwing me over while bragging about making $30,000 from her scheme made me realize I was dealing with a professional con artist who saw my family business as her personal ATM machine. Marcus arrived at my house that evening with legal books and his laptop loaded with municipal codes and regulations. "Ben, I've been doing research since Helen called me about that recording. Victoria has made some serious legal mistakes, and I think we can use them to completely turn the situation around for the next 2 weeks." Marcus and I worked almost every evening, digging through property law and something called abandoned property statutes that would become Victoria's worst nightmare. Marcus and I only needed a few days to find the weaknesses in Victoria's plan, and we were ready to fight back. I couldn't stop thinking about everything I'd already lost, and wondering if I was just setting myself up for even bigger failure. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, knowing that one mistake could destroy everything permanently. Here's what we discovered: that Victoria had never bothered to research, while she could manipulate HOA politics and intimidate people with fake legal threats. She had no actual authority to control private property or establish rental agreements on someone else's land. Every dollar she collected from HOA members for storage management was obtained under false pretenses. More importantly, every item those families had placed in my storage facility was legally considered abandoned property if they couldn't produce
Valid rental agreements with the actual property owner, which was me, not the HOA. The abandoned property laws in our state are simple and clear. If someone leaves personal property on your land without a legal agreement and you provide written notice,
for them to remove it within 72 hours. Anything left behind can be sold to recover storage costs and damages. Victoria had created the perfect legal trap for herself by encouraging 8 families to store their belongings in my facility without establishing proper contracts or documentation. But Marcus and I decided to go one step further. We researched HOA financial regulations and discovered that Victoria's collection of management fees without proper authorization was essentially embezzlement. She'd taken approximately $700 from HOA members under false pretenses, plus the $800 per month she was collecting from me in illegal rent. Our plan was elegantly simple and completely legal, though I spent countless hours second-guessing every detail I would send, written notice to all 8 families, giving them exactly 72 hours to remove their belongings from my facility. After 72 hours, anything remaining would be considered abandoned property and would be sold at public auction to recover my financial losses. From Victoria's scheme, the auction proceeds would more than compensate me for lost revenue, legal expenses and stress Victoria had caused. Helen Winters became our secret weapon in this operation, providing emotional support when my confidence wavered. Along with crucial intelligence about Victoria's activities, she was so disgusted by Victoria's deception that she volunteered to help gather additional evidence of financial misconduct. Helen discovered that Victoria had also borrowed $200 from the general HOA fund to pay personal credit card bills, claiming it was for emergency facility maintenance that never actually happened. The beauty of our plan was that it was completely transparent and legal. Unlike Victoria's scheme, we prepared official notifications on proper legal letterhead, consulted with a professional auctioneer about conducting a public sale, and researched comparable prices for the items we'd be selling. Everything we planned to do was designed to be as public and visible as possible. We wanted the entire neighborhood to understand exactly what had happened and how Victoria's lies had created this situation. 3 days before we planned to send the 72-hour notices, Victoria made a crucial mistake that handed us even more evidence. She got greedy and decided to expand her operation by allowing her cousin Rick to use part of the storage facility for his own business. Selling used car parts online, Rick started bringing in automotive inventory during weekday afternoons, and Helen witnessed one of these transactions where Victoria accepted $200 in cash from Rick for facility access fees. This was the final piece of evidence we needed to prove that Victoria was operating an illegal commercial subletting operation using property she didn't own. Not only was she stealing money from HOA members and charging me rent for my own facility, she was also running an unauthorized business rentals scheme with people who weren't even neighborhood residents. Marcus confirmed that this level of property misuse could result in criminal charges for theft, fraud, and potentially more serious offenses. On a Friday evening, I sent certified letters to all 8 families with their 72-hour notices. My hands shaking as I dropped them in the mailbox. The letters were professionally written but crystal clear about the situation. You have been storing personal property on private land without authorization from the actual property owner. You have 72 hours to remove all belongings, or they will be considered abandoned and sold at public auction to recover storage costs and associated damages. Victoria called me 30 minutes after receiving her copy, absolutely screaming about lawsuits and legal action in a voice that made me question whether I just made a terrible mistake. "Ben, you can't do this. This is HOA property. Now I'll have you arrested for theft." I let her rant for about 2 minutes before responding, very calmly, though my heart was pounding. Victoria, you have 72 hours. I suggest you spend that time explaining to your neighbors how you've been stealing their money instead of threatening me with more fake legal action. 72 hours later, not a single family had removed their belongings. They didn't believe I would actually follow through with the auction. They were wrong. Saturday morning at 8 a.m., Morrison's storage looked like a major community event, and I felt a mixture of excitement and terror about what was about to unfold. I'd hired David Park, a professional auctioneer who specialized in estate sales, and he brought all the proper equipment: microphone system, auction podium, registration tables, and a tent in case of rain word had spread throughout the surrounding neighborhoods, and we had over 40 people ready to bid on everything from furniture to automotive equipment. Victoria arrived at 7:30, a full half hour before the scheduled start time, and she was already in full panic mode. That was both satisfying and terrifying to witness. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was disheveled. She was wearing the same clothes from the day before. The fake confidence and manipulative charm were completely gone, replaced by desperate rage and barely controlled hysteria. Victoria couldn't stop trying to convince people that this was some kind of fraud, but every time she opened her mouth, people looked at her with suspicion and doubt. Every time the auction bell rang, the desperation in her eyes became more obvious, and she couldn't
stop what was happening. No matter how hard she tried, Victoria rushed to confront bidders, claiming the auction was illegal. "This is stolen property," she shouted at a couple eyeing the vintage Mustang. "If you bid, you'll be arrested for handling stolen goods." The couple hesitated, but David Park stepped in. "Ma'am, I need documentation proving ownership. If you can't provide it, I'll have to ask you to leave." Victoria couldn't produce any documentation because she'd never bothered to create
proper paperwork. At 8:15, Victoria played her final card and called the police. 2 officers arrived within 10 minutes, and Victoria immediately launched into a dramatic explanation about theft, fraud, and community property being illegally sold. Sheriff Johnson asked to see all relevant documentation from both sides before making any decisions. I provided the officers with copies of my property deed, business licenses, the original HOA bylaws, Marcus's legal research, and certified mail receipts proving proper notice had been given. Victoria provided them with absolutely nothing. Sheriff Johnson's response was swift and definitive. "Ma'am, Mr. Morrison is conducting a legal abandoned property auction on his own land. You need to leave immediately, or you'll be arrested for disrupting a lawful business activity." Victoria's reaction was spectacular and completely unhinged. She started screaming about police corruption, community conspiracies, and legal action against everyone involved when she refused to leave voluntarily. Sheriff Johnson physically escorted her to her car and informed her that any further interference would result in immediate arrest. With Victoria gone, the auction proceeded smoothly, and the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Each item in the auction brought me a large sum of money. It was the rightful compensation for everything I had to endure. The 1967 Mustang that Mr. Thompson had considered just an old car attracted intense bidding and finally sold for $24,500. The buyer was a collector who'd been searching for that exact model for over a decade. Mr. Thompson looked absolutely stunned when he realized what his worthless old car had actually been worth. Mrs. Martinez's junk furniture turned out to be a handcrafted dining room set from the 1940s made from solid oak that furniture dealers recognized as genuinely valuable vintage pieces. The set sold for $4.200 to an antique dealer. Mrs. Martinez actually started crying when she realized she'd been planning to throw away furniture worth more than most people's monthly salary. The Williams family's collection of old vinyl records included several rare pressings that attracted serious collectors. The entire collection sold for $2.800. Even the broken appliances and random household items brought in more money than expected. By the time David Park closed the auction at noon, the total proceeds were $31,000, an amount that felt like justice finally being served. The reaction from the 8 HOA families was a mixture of shock, anger, and grudging admiration. Mr. Thompson was the most vocal in his outrage, but it was directed entirely at Victoria. Victoria told me this was free community storage. She never mentioned that Ben could legally sell our stuff if we didn't have proper contracts. Mrs. Martinez was equally furious. Victoria collected $75 per month from my family for management fees. That money was supposed to go to HOA community improvements, not into her personal bank account. Helen Winter stepped forward with her most damaging revelation. Yet I need everyone to know that Victoria has been bragging about making over $30
from Ben's storage facility. She knew exactly what she was doing. When she convinced all of us to store our belongings there without proper contracts, the crowd of neighbors turned ugly very quickly, with multiple families demanding answers about
where their management fees had gone and why Victoria had encouraged them to store valuable items without proper documentation. Several people started talking about filing police reports for fraud and theft, while others discussed suing Victoria. For financial damages that afternoon, I deposited $31.00 into my business account, nearly 3 times the amount I'd lost during Victoria's year-long campaign of harassment and theft. Monday morning brought the most satisfying phone call I'd received in over a year, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future. Marcus called at 8 a.m. with news that would put the final nail in Victoria's coffin. Ben, you need to sit down for this. I spent the weekend digging deeper into Victoria's finances, and what I found is going to land her in serious legal trouble. He'd discovered that Victoria's theft from the HOA and my storage facility was just the tip of the iceberg. She'd been using HOA funds to pay personal bills for over 8 months, taking a total of $9. The community's view of me had changed. Neighbors no longer doubted me. Instead, they admired how I'd handled the situation. The evidence against Victoria was irrefutable. Bank records showed ATM withdrawals from the HOA account matching her credit card bills. There were fake invoices for non-existent maintenance and improvements. Victoria had treated HOA funds like her personal ATM, taking money whenever she pleased. Helen Winters, in her new role as HOA president, immediately contacted the county prosecutor's office to file formal charges against Victoria for embezzlement and fraud. The prosecutor was very interested in the case because HOA financial crimes were becoming increasingly common in our area. Within a week, Victoria was formally charged with multiple felonies that could result in 3 to 5 years in prison. If convicted, the community response was swift and brutal. Victoria's neighbors stopped speaking to her entirely. Her children were embarrassed to be associated with her at school and in the community. Local businesses began treating her like a pariah. When word spread about her criminal charges, the social isolation was so complete that Victoria essentially became a ghost in her own neighborhood, avoiding all public places to escape the shame and anger she'd created. The legal consequences were devastating. Victoria was forced to hire a real attorney, and defense costs were quickly draining what little money she had left after her spending spree. With stolen funds, she had to sell her newer Honda and go back to driving an ancient economy car. The designer items and salon treatments disappeared as Victoria's finances collapsed under the weight of legal fees and restitution requirements. Meanwhile, my storage facility was thriving like never before. Word had spread throughout the area about how I'd handled Victoria's attempted theft, and new customers were calling daily to rent storage space from someone they saw as honest and principled. My monthly revenue increased to over $12, 50% higher than before. Victoria's harassment campaign began. I'd gained a reputation as someone who wouldn't be intimidated by bullies or scam artists with the money I earned. I upgraded the facility and established a scholarship fund. I used $15 of the auction proceeds to completely renovate and upgrade the storage facility with new security systems, improved lighting and climate control features that attracted higher-end customers willing to pay premium rates. Another $10,000 went to establish the Morrison Memorial Scholarship Fund in my grandfather's name, providing financial assistance to local students pursuing careers in small business management. Helen Winters proved to be an exceptional HOA president, focusing on legitimate community improvements rather than personal enrichment schemes. Under her leadership, the association implemented transparent financial reporting, required board approval for all expenditures over $50, and established oversight procedures that would prevent future corruption. Property values in our neighborhood actually increased as word spread that we had responsible, honest leadership. 3 months after the auction, I received the most satisfying update of all. Victoria had accepted a plea agreement that required her to pay full restitution to both the HOA and me, perform 200 hours of community service, and serve 18 months in county jail, followed by 3 years of probation. She was also banned from holding any position of authority in homeowner associations for the rest of her life. The prosecutor told Marcus that Victoria's case would be used as an example in training programs for other law enforcement agencies. But the story doesn't end there, and it serves as a reminder that some people never learn from their mistakes. Last week, Marcus called with an interesting update from a colleague in the next county. A new HOA president named Catherine Walsh in the Oakmont neighborhood was facing very similar charges for financial misconduct and property manipulation schemes. The physical description matched Victoria perfectly: dark hair instead of blonde, but the same general appearance and manipulative behavior patterns. Some people never learn. Marcus told me they just move to a new hunting ground and try the same scams on different victims. If you're dealing with your own Victoria situation, remember this: bullies and con artists count on their victims being too polite, too trusting, or too intimidated to fight back effectively. Don't let anyone steal from you just because they have a title or claim to represent community interests. Document everything, consult with people who understand the law, and never accept that you have to be victimized by someone else's greed or manipulation. The best defense against people like Victoria is a community that stays informed, asks hard questions, and refuses to let anyone operate without proper oversight and accountability. And sometimes the most satisfying justice comes from simply giving people exactly